coming from a sports background, failure was one of those things where if you had enough failures, success would come. And then, like being an engineer, one of the first things you do when an airplane lands is you look for something that's wrong with the aircraft. That's your job. Your job is to make sure that the aircraft is safe. And by making sure that the aircraft is safe, you're actually looking for something that's broken on it so you can fix it so the airplane can get back up into the air.
Peter, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I'm constantly blown away, man, by, like we caught up once in person, then we had this digital communication. Now we're doing a podcast. Like the pace of life is fast, bro? Even how you make connections now, it's fast. Back in the day to chat with people, you had to I don't know, dig a hole together, hang out together, drink kava together. But now, what do you make of this world, bro? Is it going too fast, or do you like the pace of everything?
I think I'm one of those people that's quite a mix. I'm sort of one of those people where sometimes I'll be the extreme end of an extrovert, and then I'll retreat back into the introvert that somewhere deep down, buried deep down inside. So I kind of like the pace when it suits me, and then when it gets too much, I think I retreat into my little. I don't want to be around anyone kind of.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a balancing act.
Yeah, bro, it sure is. And it feels like a balancing act, in today's world. It feels like we're, the one thing that amazes me is we're talking about mindfulness and being in the moment. And there's nothing like being in the moment than COVID. It is only the moment. Now everyone's like, I don't want to be in the moment. I want to go back to when I could project forward and pretend things were endless. Yeah. And I think it's one of the things I've been working out is just what lens we see things through. When you said that you kind of, I guess, are trying to find that balance and work out, what's too fast, what's not fast enough. Is that something that you think that our ancestors have always been doing? Has your family, I guess all of our families have always done that, right? Always changed, always kind of, I don't know what I'm trying to say, bro. It just feels like at the moment, even the story you told when I first met you, for 50 years, people who had your job had that job for life.
Yeah.
And maybe we should talk a little bit about that. But before we do, it's change, we're constantly changing. Yeah, it's a real interesting one.
Yeah. No, I think, if we looked at our ancestral and our background, if we go back to our heritage, I was funny enough, I was talking to someone in the weekend about our ancestors when they voyaged, they didn't just pick up their baskets and stock up the canoe and just sail. They sailed with the seasons, when a certain tree was flowering and the currents and the tides were right, they'd set sail. Not like today, you want to go somewhere, you jump on the boat, start up the engine, and you sort of just weather the storm and hope to God you get from point A to point B. whereas in the past, if you study navigation, and the early ancestors, the Polynesians and Micronesians, the Melanesians, when they circumnavigated the Pacific, they traveled only during certain times of the year. It's seasonal, right? When I was growing up, I was studying social science, and I learned about the trade winds. And I wondered, now in my 30s, I understand what the trade winds mean. It's because during a certain time of the year, those winds blow from a certain direction across the island. So that means people would trade with those winds. They didn't just set sail and go, all right, let's hope to God we go and land on this set of islands. They knew that every time these winds came through, it'll carry them to that place. So I think, if we talked about moving, and our history and our ancestors, I think it's taught us now to move with the seasons. I mean, you look at the puhutakawa trees, they're about to flower. That tells us that, it's almost Christmas, it's almost summer, the kinas are going to be, ready for the picking, and that means that the kinas are ready for the picking. That means we're going to get some fresh big fat fish, ready to catch. We don't need a calendar, and we don't just go out at any time we want. I think that's really taught us how to really be in sync with the here and the now, and it's a
And
mixed match, right?
that's right, bro. And I couldn't help but think when you were talking that we get locked in our rooms and we don't even we can't even feel the wind, or the wind is
Yeah,
a heat pump, and it's easy to see when you talk like this why it gets so confusing, because you're not
yeah,
actually able to calibrate on this other language, right? It's outside of the spoken language. It's like
yeah,
this. And I think that's what's so fascinating about looking back into the past is, we might think we have all of the things now and look at the internet and we can do all the stuff, but we paid the price, right, of giving up some of that, giving up some of those truths. And I guess that's why I like when I heard that you had a kava business. I was like, oh, okay, well, we can talk about all the fancy iPhones, but at the end of the day, sit down, have a kava. There's another language being spoken. How did you start your kava business, bro?
Oh, that's a funny thing. So COVID came around. I sitting around trying to figure out, all right, how are we gonna pivot? How am I gonna pivot with everything that's happening around me? And got in touch with some of the cousins back home in Fiji. They're sort of like, hey, Peter, can you help us? The market's quite concentrated here. The middleman is ripping us off every time we go to the market. We're not getting our fair share of our produce. So I said, oh, look, let me see what I can do on this side or New Zealand. There's a market for it here. I'll try and figure out a way I can sell your produce here. So it started off as an idea where I could help my cousin and some of the farmers on the island he lives in or lives on. And it started as that, purely a social enterprise where they'd give me like a small batch of kava, they'd ship it over Korea, obviously do all the bio stuff. It'd land here, and then I'll just try and sell it at the rate that it was going for here. And about 90% of all proceeds went back to my cousin and the farmers. So it started off that way, and then next minute, I found myself starting up a Shopify account, e-commerce, and then kind of made it a bit more sort of professional looking, and then it kind of just has sort of grown a leg of its own, and now I've got people asking me if I can sell all sorts of produce on that website.
Wow.
So yeah, it's grown from kava to now artists wanting to sell some of the artwork on it. Now I'm talking to some people from Samoa and Tonga about selling some of their crops, some of the artwork, home decor stuff, jewelry. So yeah, just sort of now it's turning into something like a Amazon of the Pacific.
Wow.
Yeah,
Bro,
but
that's an
it's
awesome
slowly.
tagline. Put that on the Amazon of the Pacific. Um, look, I think because we just jumped straight in and I heard your story, so soon we'll go to a little break. And when we come back, I think let's just start firstly, after the break, where I found you. So we were talking about your stuff within New Zealand and then the COVID thing happened. And so stay with us, everybody, because it's one heck of a story and it's only just begun. But before we go to break, kava in itself and the artwork you're talking about, isn't it interesting that the commerce is dealing with very human things? It's dealing with we talked a little bit about the unspoken language. I feel like that's what's coming through, right? What we can't explain, we're able to process it through our traditions and through our artwork and these are one of the what do they call them? The silver linings, eh?
Yeah.
We never would have taken time to sit down and think that these things are important, but now with COVID, everything's important, right?
Oh, definitely, 100%. And I think COVID's allowed us to make the connection. Connectivity is allowing people, those who's entrepreneurial enough to actually create opportunities. If you're asleep, if you're coming out of COVID and you haven't identified an opportunity, it was never. There's a saying I read, it was never it was never time. It was never time that you had. It was discipline that you didn't have. I mean, we've had a lot of time on our hands. We know we've been in a couple of lockdowns, sitting out at home. You're trying to figure out a way to pivot, trying to figure out a way out of this. And yeah, I think connectivity has allowed us to reconnect with the land. It's allowed people to sort of go, hey, look, how can I make a living through the use of internet? I mean, back home in Fiji, two industries got stung. The tourism industry and aviation. And if you look at an island like Fiji, if tourism goes, half of the island's unemployed, or especially in the tourist sector, right? And then aviation, you got a whole bunch of pilots, engineers, flight attendants, especially from my hometown and my side of the country. So when those two industries went down, there's not a lot of cash flow in the economy. So what started was the barter system. Like, people went back to bartering, and they didn't do it the old-fashioned way. They did it through Facebook and internet and connectivity. So that was an interesting take on how things have sort of, we've had a sort of a remix of the past, the present, and the future, sort of all in one now.
It's look, I was going to say it's crazy. It's kind of not. It's just normal way, because that's how for most of time people lived like this. They didn't have the certainty or the veil of certainty like we have now, right? We want the certain, and it's taking us a lot of mental energy to get over ourselves, because it's just like we're in the moment, and that's all we've got, because we've only got each other. And it's a scary prospect, but man, it's awesome. Stay with us, everybody. Peter, stay with us. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about this journey you've been on. Let's take a break, and back in just one tick. Okay, so we set it up a little bit, brother, about, this journey. Where do we start? I guess let's start with what you were doing just before COVID. And if you would, take us down that journey. It feels like a million years ago, but for you, it was only a matter of months ago. What's the setup? You had this job for life, apparently, right?
Yeah. So I think to tell the story, I'll have to go a bit further back. My journey to New Zealand. I came to New Zealand, studied aircraft engineering, and like most island boys, had a crack at playing rugby in Christchurch, Marist Albion. Shout out to the boys at Marist Albion in Christchurch. So, and then sort of, realized that rugby wasn't going to take me far. So, stuck it out with engineering, studied aircraft engineering, and I got offered apprenticeship, did my apprenticeship with Air New Zealand. So what would have normally taken about 5 years, sort of back then we did it in about 3 years. And if you did your unit standards quick enough, you had an opportunity to sort of finish a bit early. So with that, I managed to sort of travel a little bit, and I traveled overseas, contracted, worked overseas, traveled around the globe a bit, did a couple of small stints on oil rigs, and I did about 2 stints there, and then sort of traveled in Europe predominantly, a bit in America. And one of my stints, I worked at Airbus, where they make airplanes, and I had the opportunity to be part of a team that rolled out A380s, the big double-deckers. So that was when I was living in France for a bit, and then I got to learn and understand how to sell airplanes and support the selling process of airplanes. When you buy a new car, they've got to help you with warranty, maintenance, upgrades. So I did that with the airplane on a bigger scale. Came back to New Zealand, and came back to New Zealand back in 2011, and then decided I was gonna study, and I studied. Did a double degree in economics and international business. Did a complete switch, went from engineering and studied business. And it was at that point where I realized that I was going to go into a more commercial part of my career. So within Air New Zealand, I was constantly looking for opportunities. And just before COVID, I was fortunate enough to be part of the Air New Zealand learning team, where we sold a lot of learning and training to pilots and engineers and flight attendants, not just in New Zealand, but in the region and in the Australasia Pacific. So I was doing a lot of strategy work, business development, a lot of sales, marketing, that sort of stuff. COVID hit, kind of the writing was on the wall. So I decided, you know what, over the last 20 years, I've built a pretty good career. I've filled my toolbox with the right sort of skill set. I've done quite a bit. Time to go out on my own, and that's when I kind of just went out and started with that entrepreneurial gig. To help out with the Kazis back home in Fiji with the kava, and then did my own, and then sort of restarted this business consultancy work I was doing back in 2017. When you're in New Zealand, you pick up a lot of skills. It's like when you're on the floor, you do project management, program management, you do lean, agile. So all these certificates, all these qualifications you pick up, you don't realize how skilled you are until you leave that little institution. So while I was in New Zealand, I used to moonlight as a consultant, helping small manufacturing firms do agile and lean. So back in 2017, I did a couple of little gigs as a consultant, and 2020 came. I put my hand up, took redundancy, took my exit package, and then went one handies on this business consultancy gig, and on the side, obviously running the social enterprise with the kava business and the online store. Wow. And that's sort of the journey I've been. It's been a out of it journey.
Yeah. Well, and we're still in it, eh? That's the thing, right? Like fun. It's fun talking to you when you're Steve Jobs and you're running the Amazon of the Pacific, but we're still in it. That's the crack up thing for me.
Still hustling, still grinding, and but it's been good. It's been good, and like the good thing about it is the studying hasn't stopped. Like I'm doing a dissertation right now, and hopefully next year, if I'm not too lazy and I keep the same passion, I take up a role. It's been an invitation, pathway program into like a PhD research. Wow. So I get to carry on with that if all goes to plan this year. I finish a few things that I'm supposed to finish. Nice, so yeah, that's been quite good, and I get to do that. But it's interesting. It's interesting. Get to run my own business. Get to do the social enterprise, and I get to study and do a bit of research. And it's funny the amount of doors that open up when you talk to someone about, I'm doing a research. And I get to interview a couple of execs, a couple of board members in the corporate field, a couple of iwi board members. So that's really cool, man.
And there's something in there too that we kind of skip over, which is like, it's interesting when opportunities come up, but like I think we sit down and we're like, I analyze what's happening, and some people think, why are opportunities not coming my way? And then other people maybe don't see an opportunity when it's there. And it's a real tough thing because, I think, and I will just say gently that, let's say, people from the Pacific, I think the goal to move to somewhere like New Zealand was to have a secure life. We didn't have to run the risk of running out. And I know that's what my grandmother and my mum, their goal was, we got the house, now we can bring the family over and we do all that stuff. I always say to her, my mum, I'm like, what you created was someone like me who you allowed the ability to dream big. I don't know what to do with that, Mum. You had a clear path, which was like, make it better than, what it was like for you. But when I really talked to her, life was pretty cool for her, So there's this whole, I'm like, there's mental health things now, Mum, and everyone's kind of struggling with meaning, and it's not so obvious where we all belong. And she's like, you'll work it out, And I'm like, yeah, we will. But I'm trying to work out, and maybe I'll ask you this: how do you catalog an acceptable level of risk? So let's say, for example, you're someone who's got an idea, and an opportunity presents itself. When do you decide? Like, were you pushed by COVID to do it, or were you already kind of thinking, I got to do my own business?
I think it's two things, right? The first thing is, people always say, "Oh, Peter, you're a jammy, you're a jammy guy. You're quite lucky. You're always landing on your feet. You always seem to be." And I always say, well, it's not luck. It's when preparedness meets opportunity. You've got to be prepared, and when an opportunity comes, you got to pounce onto it and latch onto it. And if you heard me talking about my career, the last 20 years within New Zealand, working overseas, I didn't realize I was preparing myself, and I was kind of getting my Batman belt, super belt ready, because I didn't realize COVID hit, and I had that utility belt, that Batman has, So I think that's the whole being prepared for an opportunity. And the other one is being optimistic, but evenly balancing out with being a realist. And there's something called the Stockdale paradox. It talks about prisoners of war. People who survived war camps, prisoners who survived war camps. And there's this book called the Stockdale Paradox, where the prisoner, he talks about how he survived the war, right? If you're one of those prisoners that went into like say World War II, you go into prison quite early in the war, and you're like, you got no idea when the war is going to end. So you've got a level of optimism, like, oh yeah, the war's going to end next week. The Allied troops are advancing, from Normandy, and we don't know how far, but it's going to end. And those that were so optimistic, they kept wishing that. So from week to week, eventually, over a period of time, they lost hope and gave up and didn't survive the prison, being a prisoner of war. Whereas those the Stockdale paradox talks about how the prisoner of war was able to balance out being optimistic and being real about being a realist. So that was sort of the two things that I always sort of look at in this opportunity was when COVID came, I saw an opportunity, and I was very, talking to my wife and the family and friends, the support group I had. There's a lot of realism. Like I looked at and the writing was on the wall. Aviation wasn't going to survive that long without numbers traveling, and and then the economy, the numbers just kind of just spoke to me, and I sort of just went, you know what, I'll take my chances and I'll go with it. So that was just me, sort of, that's my spin on it. Like those two particular scenarios.
Yeah. And what was that conversation like with your wife? When was it something like, like what did you say? Hey, sweetheart, I'm thinking of handing in my resignation during a worldwide pandemic.
Oh, actually, she was actually quite supportive of it. We sat down, we'd always talked about this, back in 2011, when I decided I was going to do this business study, she supported me throughout the whole thing. And I kept saying, one of these days, I'll climb the ladder. When I go to an executive role, you don't have to work anymore. Mm-hmm. That was the dream. That was sort of the goal we'd set for ourselves. I don't have to. I can be a stay-at-home mom, and you can do that. Earn a big paycheck. But when COVID came, the opportunity was there, and it's like, hey, look, you've always dreamt of running your own business. You wanted to do this thing. We've set ourselves up all right. She had got herself a second contract to sort of bring in a second income. So that was, for us, we kind of were lucky in a way. But in saying that, my wife was equally or even more qualified than me. She sort of was able to get a lot of those take up her opportunities and use her qualifications to sort of set us up for that opportunity, really.
Yeah, man.
So yeah, she was right in my corner, backing me 200%.
Yeah, and that's isn't that amazing that let's say normal society doesn't really value things like that as much as they value how many Twitter followers you have or something like that. But in the crunch moments, having someone in your corner 200% is massive, eh? And the weird thing is, you can't even prove it. You can wear a wedding ring, but you can't prove it on paper. It's no algorithm. It's just like, it's a trust thing. And it's like a faith. It's beautiful, really, because... yeah, I don't know. We're going deep. Let's go to a quick break, and when we come back, we'll just keep talking, bro. This is really fun. Stay with us, everyone. Back with Peter in just a sec. Peter, so one thing that's captured my mind is obviously we're still in the middle of everything. It's not so obvious where the future goes. I think what everyone's really realizing is that change is constant. And of course, change has always been constant, but this current system of what worked yesterday may not work tomorrow. Even as something as simple as, your favorite coffee shop, you might not be able to go if we're back on lockdown. This is change and it's rapid, and I think it's probably made some people hunker down in their mindset and some people flourish in other ways. And I'm trying to explore how I feel about that. Like one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I'm keen to pick your brains, is, it seems that if you were in an industry which was affected, you have no choice but to grow. But if you're in an industry that wasn't affected, life's got busier for you. You've probably got a pay rise because you've found opportunity. So are we creating a divide in people's mindsets where some people think everyone believes COVID's hasn't been a good thing, but people like yourself who were faced to look at the unknown and have taken that path forward, I don't know what that's going to mean. What does that mean in 20 years when we talk about this idea of we just kind of talked about essential workers, but we never broke down what was essential.
Yeah.
It seems to me that what was essential was, well, not McDonald's, but the chemist. But what do you do with that information, And I don't really know. So I sat here and I'm like, man, I want to invest in human, That's why I got into breathing, because I'm like, COVID attacks the respiratory system. So I will be an expert in how to build a respiratory system over the next 10 years. And I'm like, that was super obvious to me, but it's still nothing to do with my skill set. I spent the last 10 years doing this stuff, creating videos and podcasts.
Yeah.
And now I'm like having to tell myself this story of, keep being open to that stuff. Yeah, man. I don't know. I mean, how are you keeping yourself open to what's happening? Are you interacting with lots of people who didn't lose their jobs versus those who are forced into a new normal?
Yeah. To answer that question, I think, I'll go back a little bit. There's a saying, and as humans we default to it, right? There's a saying that goes, I can only earn a life I love by doing the things I hate. So a lot of people would prefer to win at all costs doing something they hate than lose at doing something they love. And I think COVID is slowly allowing people to really take a second look at that. And to answer your question, when I looked at it, and I goes, all right, sweet. What do I actually love doing? What do I love doing that I can actually monetize and create, and help my wife build a home, pay the mortgage, put food on the table? What do I love doing? And two things I love doing. I love being a dad and a husband, and I love being around people. And because I love being a dad, that parenting skill, I naturally gravitate to teaching and coaching and sharing my knowledge. So with that in mind, I kind of went, all right, sweet. I've had this 20 years of building myself into who I am today. I'm sure I can actually monetize that and actually help people. And that's how it came about. And I think, if you actually stop for a second and go, all right, what do I love doing? And then start asking, okay, why do I want to do this? Okay, what makes me want to, what's the drive? What's the purpose? And I think for me, that, I had to really think about why I wanted to do what I'm doing today. And that's the biggest thing. And I had to bring it down to that, being a dad, being a husband, and just love being around people.
It's beautiful, bro. And the bit that always buzzes me out when I enter these moments with someone in a podcast is I'm not sure. I think people believe that's exactly what we need to do, but I'm not sure we always give ourselves permission to ask those questions. And I'm not sure that if I think about where we're playing right now, maybe on Freeview or Sky or even around a lot of other Pacific content, that there'll be that many other bits of content which ask a question as direct as you just presented an opportunity to do. What is it that you have a passion for? And what I love about what we're doing right now is let's plant that seed. Let's get your subconscious mind to think about it over your dreams tonight. You know, there is some magic stuff that happens in that subconscious. And I mean, we know it. We know it through humor. You know, the carver has a part to play in unlocking that.
Yeah.
I think where one area I am really excited in what we're doing collectively is, you know, the new generation, the ones who are right on the edge of like, it's fast, is like, how do we take a bit from that, and join them and make something awesome? And what I really mean by that is, how do you make yourself awesome? It's something everyone, they want to be cool, they want to be awesome. Everyone wants to be awesome. But I think it's all kind of irrelevant if you don't get some fundamentals, which is, what the hell do you like to do? How did you know what you like to do? What was your steps into following your passions? And I mean, you talked a little bit about it with the rugby and, you know, the engineering, but did you need a certain amount of support from people around you? Or, like, I guess what I'm saying is, did you have space to think? Were you encouraged to think? I want to share that information so others out there watching, listening can be like, man, I can do this.
I think the best way to sort of put that and wrap it up in a sentence is, life is a summation of life's experience, all our experience, the journey we've taken. And a lot of people thrive in success, but I think one of the things that I've found is I'm always trying to analyze my failures. And I think I overthink it. And one of the things that I think that is sort of like a superpower, but also one of my downsides. You know, I look at failures and I go, yeah, sweet, how can I fix that? Because I remember, you know, when you do sports or when you play your sports, you're always looking at how to improve, right? You're always looking at what you did wrong, not what you did good, because, you know, like I tell people, I can walk into a room and tell people how good I am. I don't need anyone telling me, but I as a human default, I can't really walk into a room and tell people what I'm doing bad or what I'm not good at. You know, I kind of rely on feedback. And I think failure is one of those things that's allowed me to really always look back and go reassess and go, well, how can I improve? I think, you know, coming from a sports background, failure was one of those things where if you had enough failures, success would come. And then, like being an engineer, one of the first things you do when an airplane lands is you look for something that's wrong with the aircraft. That's your job. Your job is to make sure that the aircraft is safe. And by making sure that the aircraft is safe, you're actually looking for something that's broken in it so you can fix it so the airplane can get back up into the air. So yeah, I think that's it. You know, the experiences that I've had along the way has allowed me to really build on that, and it's you just build on it. It's like I kind of told a lot of young youth that I mentor, stop living life by a checklist and tick box. You know, use it like a pyramid. You know, like a pyramid, and you have each pyramid has layers to it, right? And each layer is made up of individual blocks. And life should be about building blocks and placing it. And each milestone in your life should be a layer of that pyramid completed. Then you go to the next one, you know, and then it's not until you're sort of, you know, you punch in and it's time to sort of, you know, say bye-bye to everyone. That's the capping stone on your pyramid. That's when your pyramid's finished. And I think that should be the journey in life. Is not, you know, I hear a lot of people goes, oh, the best time in my life, or, you know, this is the highlight of my life. It's like, no, that's just one page or one layer of your pyramid finished. Time to start on the next layer. I think that's what it is. And when you look at pyramids, and if you look at the history of pyramids, there's a lot of failures, right? There's generations of failures before you saw a successful pyramid being built.
And then there's pyramid schemes, which sometimes I'm probably a part of with my breathing, and I guess I want to acknowledge that, because sometimes we're right on the edge, eh? Failure is the word itself. That means there's no guarantee. It means it hasn't worked. It's something I talk about often on the podcast, that we love it. I think that's why we love sport. We love movies, because there's always the opportunity for failure, and normally it's like lose right up until you finish and then win. And it's always like that. Rocky, Indiana Jones, Superman, all these big things, you lose
100%.
And we know it and we love it, because if it was win, it wouldn't be fun to watch. Yet when it comes to your life, you're like, I want to just have it go perfect, and it's a little bit freaky, but that's why we're here. We're here together to just chill out together and be like, all right, we got this, because we do got this, because there is only tomorrow and the hours are going to keep ticking. So we've got to think about it. And I think that's a really good point. What you raised good points, but the big one that I'm picking up is what is your passion? And you can write that down. You can talk yourself about that. You can go for a walk. You can think about that. Last break, and we'll come back and we'll just keep going deep. The deeper we go, we might revert back through the wormhole. Stay with us, everybody. Back with Peter in just a second. Just picking up on our last segment, we talked a little bit about the pyramid and the foundation, and building up on what you've got. I'll run this idea past you. I've been thinking about this idea called, it's like buffering, right?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about it in terms of a mortgage, that it was quite acceptable to have a 30-year mortgage, right? That would be something that no one would really have any problems with. You just pay a mortgage off over time. The problem I have with that now is that I don't think people have an appetite to look 30 years forward. They want to look like days forward, months forward.
Yeah.
No one can really think 30 years forward. That has become some imaginary wobbly timeline. So I was thinking to myself, if I take that to the prism of work, we used to give ourselves things like, well, I'll find a job, I'll eat crap for a few years, and then I will have a sweet job, and that'll be my job for life. And I think COVID also ripped that away. So I've been wondering what an acceptable amount of buffering would be. And I've been playing with this idea, in survival, you got the rule of threes, you got 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without air. And I was like, well, what if you had 3 months of buffer? So what do I mean by that? I was telling you the tension of side hustle versus day job, or passion versus doing what I need to do. And what's your thoughts on a bit of a 3 month buffer? So that means you could save up what you how much you need for 3 months, and then you've got 3 months of you time, and month one might be establish and outline properly what your your business plan, your passions, because it shouldn't be just guaranteed that that, especially if you've been doing a job all your life, and you don't have COVID to push you. Anyway, just your initial thoughts on the 3 month buffer, the pyramid scheme by Will Fleming.
I think that's pretty cool, because if you think about it, that's a quarter of the year, right?
Yeah,
that's a quarter of the year. And if you look at it and quarters, like we do in the financial world, the first quarter is always that hard one. I think that's a pretty cool idea, man.
Well, I don't know if it is, because I don't want people to try it, because it's the problem is certainty. Certainty still, you've got to trust a lot to break the certainty. Hey.
Yeah.
And I try and tell myself that, well, what's the downside to certainty? Unhappiness. You know, how many relationships broke up because everyone was working? You know, a lot. And statistics tell us that, you know, you're more likely to, well, I don't know if it's true, but you're more likely to break up, and then it's harder to stay married. And I'm like, well, what do we do with that information? You know, I know you can go to work all day. Anyway, we probably don't need to get bogged down on that. It's something we can look. Ultimately, I'm just trying to think. It's like a brainstorming it within,
Yeah.
and also we just get to. I'll tell you where I landed on it. So I have an opportunity to potentially study next year with Professor Schofield at AUT, and he does a lot of human performance, and he has been a former guest on the podcast and said, "Well, you've been researching this kind of stuff for years. You just do it in your podcast. How about you come and do your master's and you be the guy that people have on their podcasts, you know, for breathing, ancestral breathing and how we breathe nasally." And I'm like, that's a good idea. But then I thought, whoa, how do I even approach that? You know, like I work full time. So where I landed, and this might be an interesting insight to you, is I saved up so that I had enough to take 1 month unpaid leave.
Yeah.
And I cleared it with the bosses and everyone's happy. And for November, I'll be spending time with my family and spending time organizing what would me studying next year look like.
Yeah.
And that's it. And making time to catch up with yourself and other people and just like creating opportunities. And I'm like, it's quite genius, because all I had to do was be strict and save up enough money to cover 1 month. And who knows what plants I seed for my future.
Yeah.
You know, because we normally do it over summer, but then we're all like eating sausages and chilling out and going for swims, and actually businesses are closed, you know, so.
Yeah. No, I like it because I think, because that's kind of what I'm doing anyway. That's why people ask me, oh, how do you manage trying to do a research program, your dissertation, your consultancy work, and then trying to build your clientele? And one of the things I always try, and I remain honest and religiously true to it, is I try and wear the one hat all the time. So whether I'm doing research, whether I'm doing reading, or whether I'm talking to a client, or whether I'm meeting, networking, everything feeds into each other. So I'm kind of doing my research at the same time. I'm collecting information, and I'm networking with people, and I'd be like, as soon as like, I'm like one of those people, like, so someone name drop someone, I'd be like, who's that guy? And within 2 minutes, I've got them connected on LinkedIn, or I've already downloaded a book that they wrote and I'm listening to it. So to me, I don't differentiate between the work I do and the research. And I think that's why that's why I was able to, successfully get through university as a mature adult, especially in a different field from, going from engineering to business, right? I think that was the key thing for me was I never had to take one hat off and put another one on. I just constantly went from one thing to another, and I just used the two to overlap. And I think that buffering thing is going to work quite well there for you, is because, the first month is going to be like, okay, how do I make it work? And then I think naturally you will find that balance where actually I'm not even studying anymore. I'm just doing more podcasts, and I'm just selling more ad space, and I'm just earning, I'm earning money as I'm talking to people, and people are just giving me information that's feeding into my research, and I'm getting paid to do it. So that's what I meant by like, doing what you love doing and seizing the opportunity to monetize it. I think that's how that buffering thing would work for you. I don't know.
I hear you. Yeah. And I think there's like, because it can be a developing story, right? And what I always like is that, and I told you when we talked on the phone, there's a large percentage of our Pacific audience who don't have reliable internet, who don't have access to, the latest smartphones, and they're watching on Freeview. And it really buzzes me out that we can offer a really high caliber conversation like this, and you don't need all the bells and whistles or the latest app, just the willingness to be open. And the opportunity might be that they can now Google you, that they can now contact me, that they have access to, the network that we are building. And
Yeah.
like that simple, like, you talked about if I hear someone, I write their name, I connect on LinkedIn. I do the same. I did the same to you. I heard the bit that I was like, "Ooh, that's interesting," is you're like, I willingly gave up my job at Air New Zealand. And I'm like, boom. Because for me, what that services in me is I don't come from the really tough upbringing. So why I say that is I've been kind of had to learn how to be a bit more tough. So I want to talk to people who have been through hard decisions. And I don't know if everyone has, but I want to know, how did you get over conflict? I call it more like, maybe not conflict, but going into the unknown. And as soon as I realized that I come from ancestry of people who that was their job to explore, to how much do I need? Well, I heard a story from that guy, the winds are going this way, I think we'll be all right. But they never knew 100%. And so what was the tools they were using, and this is our all of our learning to rediscover the bits that we've maybe forgotten and the bits that we're learning as we go. And there's something kind of cool. But I do maintain, man, that when it all turns to custard, we've only got each other, right? So the more contacts you have, not the followers, like the connections, you can just that email, the podcast, the catch up if you can. Man, it's awesome. Hey, where can people follow you, dude? Where can people buy kava from you? Let's promote, because you've definitely shared a few gems with us tonight, so we want to thank you.
All right, so on Facebook, it's same Peter Elbourne. People struggle with it, so it's Melbourne without an M, so Elbourne. So Facebook, it's Peter Elbourne. Also with the social enterprise, selling kava and products from the Pacific, it's Pacifics. It's a play on word, PASIFIX.shop. Or you can find us on Facebook, Pacifics as well. Professionally, I'm on LinkedIn. So I kind of taken a different spin at the moment. I'm building my brand. So I don't have a website, and I kind of strategically am using LinkedIn as my website. So I put some content on there. I talk about some stuff I'm doing, or I just connect in with people and I engage with people. So that's my website at the moment, is my LinkedIn profile.
Awesome, bro. Well, Peter, thank you, man, for joining us and sharing and spending time with us. Again, I look forward to chatting with you when you are the Bill Gates of the Pacific. But right now, you're just Peter, who's, that's not a bad thing. But look, thank you for hanging out with us, dude. And La Story is still going, and that's the big thing I want to get through, is that we're all just us, and we just got to keep going, right? That's the main thing. Keep moving forward. Awesome. Okay, bro. Well, thank you again. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.